Hi folks, you're with Tacitus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about, well, YouTube, it's alleged, and I've gone online to look, YouTube have said that we can now talk about the 2020 presidential election, and I've been banned for a week. I think it's twice now on YouTube over the last several years, or I don't know, 4 or 5 years, how long I've been doing this. And both of it's been because I'd referenced in some way the 2020 election. Now that ban's apparently been lifted, but we'll see if this video here is still up in the days to come. Then we'll know YouTube's as good as their word, and if not, then we'll know that they're at the forefront of disinformation and misinformation. Better watch out. Miss Jankovic will be on here. So let's have a look at this. I mean, it's very strange that there's only one election in the entire history of the world that you couldn't talk about, and it was that election. Now, that to me has created more problems with its legitimacy or its perceived legitimacy than if an exhaustive examination of the concerns of many voters, many millions of voters were concerned that the outcome was heavily curated to produce a result that the globalists were happy with. And we see globalist paw prints all over the Western world. They can install the prime minister of their choice without even a vote. In Great Britain, the United Kingdom has a prime minister that nobody fucking voted for, but who was the globalist candidate. I mean, just consider that, if you will. But coming back to the presidential election, now for the globalist project to go ahead and to continue to rumble along, which it is, then the globalists must control the United States. The clout that the United States has to bully and threaten other countries into going along with the globalist project and so on. So the globalists must have the United States. Now, in 2016, they thought that Hillary was a bit of a shoo-in, just to make sure. I think they curated quite a few million votes in that election as well, but they didn't curate them in the right places, and the key sort of swing states, Trump won by fairly narrow margins, but. So I think it was just an under curation event there. And the globalists would thought, look, we control the media. We control pretty much every talking head. There's only a few pockets of information that we don't control. So Hillary's going to win, and we can continue with the globalist project. The mass immigration, the appointing activist judges to the courts, and so on and so forth. So when Trump won, it took them by surprise, and they straight away went to Plan B, which was to harass his presidency and tie it up in nuisance lawsuits and so on. Something they're still doing to Trump today. So nothing's really changed in that playbook. But when it came to 2020, the globalists were, fuck, we got to get rid of this guy. The globalist project is slowing down to a crawl. He's really gumming up the globalist project works here. Immigration's been slowed down to a trickle of what we wanted. Constitutional judges are being appointed to the courts instead of the activists, black lesbians that we wanted. All our efforts to destabilize Western society and make it, to have the globalist project pushing on, all of that's been undermined or been severely restrained. So we've got to get rid of this guy, and any means necessary will do. It's not enough that we control the media. It's not enough that we control the commentariat. It's not enough we control the NGOs. It's not enough that we control the universities and so on. We have to do more. Now, this was where, for someone like myself, I've done a vast amount of business traveling, and I've been through third world countries when they've been having elections, or just before an election, just after an election. Now, these elections are just showpieces, and I've sat down with government heavies. They've been invited to dinners where there have been government heavies there in these third world countries. It's quite chilling when you're sitting next to somebody who seems quite pleasant and charming, who's telling you about, how many protesters they had killed and how many agitators or people that they're a problem that they can make disappear, and said very, very calmly in a soft voice with a smile, and you're sitting next to this guy having your having your dinner, realizing that he's probably murdered a fuckload of people, and so you're very careful not to cause any offence. Let me tell you. but anyway, in the third world, I've mentioned things about the standard. This is going back years before 2020. About how the integrity of Western elections, not that it was perfect, it wasn't, and it was fiddled with here and there, particularly in very, very tight and close elections. The temptation to try and swing it with just a little bit of corruption was always too much for these political goons, and they would try it. Not that it all. They only had a certain sort of reach, like the electoral commissions were often independent and incorruptible. And so it was just hard for them to do it. It could be done, but it was just harder for them to do it. Whereas in the third world countries, if I mentioned anything about free and fair elections, the room would just break up into laughter. There's no such thing in this country. And free and fair elections, where there was an agreed mechanism to hand over power based on the will of the people through the ballot box. We used to think that was how it was done, but it's not. There's only a few countries. There'd be 20 odd countries in the whole, out of 200 odd, or 197, whatever it is. There's 10% of the world's governments are decided by the ballot, or were decided by the ballot box. I don't think it's anywhere near that now. Obviously not in Britain it isn't, or Germany, or France, or the United States. But anyway, at the time, that's a very rare thing, the agreed handover of power. And this is part of the wider social contract between the governed and the governing. And we need to always come back to that social contract, some of which is enshrined in law and so on. Some of which is sort of implied through custom. For example, before there was a mechanism to hand over power from, say, one king to another, one government to another, one political party to another, that sort of thing. There was often these terrible civil wars as various claimants. So, well, I'm the previous monarch's third cousin, so I deserve the king, the kingship, and so on. So there were often these terrible civil wars. Now, the merchant class and people who had any business interests, or those who were obliged to provide troops and supplies and logistics to the combatants, were going broke. They couldn't do business. It was costing them a fortune. So a lot of people didn't want that. Now, what the various claimants to the throne would do, so, well, if I get the kingship, I'm going to give you a shitload of goodies and monopolies, and you're going to get rich beyond your wildest dreams, but you have to support me being the king. So there were various bribes and inducements being used by the claimants to the throne, but sometimes they can involve sort of civil wars, and on again, off again civil wars that could last for decades. And the economic destruction overall was such that if there was a sort of a reasonably cohesive nobility, an aristocracy sort of below the king, then they would opt for stability, and they would tend to back a certain claimant that simply in the interest of stability. This further developed in political party terms, at least, when Parliament became supreme, as it did in England, as enshrined sort of forevermore in the late 1600s. That the government would change based on the will of the people. Now, at that stage, the voting pool was quite small, less than 10% of the population. But that agreement, that framework for handing over power was there. Now, as part of that as well, because various claimants, once they got the throne, would then politicise the judiciary to go after their enemies or people they didn't like, kangaroo courts and all this sort of jazz. So there was this desire to, well, let's have independent courts. So whoever does get power, they can't use judiciary to persecute their opponents or alternative sources of power are just simply people they don't like. So this was a developing, evolving, organic social contract that the Americans benefited from, Canada, Australia, and so on. Didn't quite go the same way in other countries, but there were many similarities. Germany, for example, I thought they'd handled that quite well through the even from the early 1850s onwards. Certainly that was the case, I think, in the German states, just prior to and again after federation. So this social contract happened in the white countries, the Anglo countries, and those are the countries under the biggest assault now. Not because only because that social contract directly gets in the way of the globalist project. And so the peaceful transfer of power, through the will of the people expressed by the ballot box, is in direct contradiction to what the globalists are trying to achieve. So that has to go. Now, what used to intrigue me as well in third world countries was that people would, this is sometimes after a bit of alcohol had gone down, was that they would sort of talk to me. So why do you think it's a good idea to have a peaceful transfer of power based on the will of the people? If you're in government and you hold the levers of power, why would you relinquish that willingly? Well, why would you do that? Why not just kill off your opponents or imprison them or declare them as illegal and drag them in front of kangaroo courts and have them thrown in prison or murdered or something? Why not do that? Why, if you have this power already, why would you give it away or let other people have it? I mean, that's got to be a definition of insanity. These third world corrupt goons would tell me, and you try and explain, as I have just a moment ago, the social contract, the peaceful transfer of power, and when you have contracts, whether it be the contract of the social contract or contract of maybe a business deal or contract of a transaction, or those sorts of things, that the police will be independent, the courts will be independent and impartial and apply the law equally to all citizens, this sort of thing. Once you have that social contract or greater contract, the concordat, or call it what you like, then that creates surety and confidence. And once people have that confidence, then it creates a sense of legitimacy that all can share in that sense. Now, there may be some with grievances, and maybe there's going to be one or two people picked off here and there that the state doesn't like. But for 99.9% of the population, they're going to be treated far more fairly and reasonably, and with reference to the law, codified law, than they would anywhere else. So you try and explain that to third world people, and they look at you blankly and think that you're slightly insane. Why give away power? If you have power, use it, crush your opponents, enrich yourself, be corrupt as fuck. But for goodness sake, giving it away has got to be the letting someone else have that power has got to be the definition of madness, they would think, and they would assert to me. Let's come back now to the 2020 election. Now, I'm one of these people that believes that there should be a peaceful transfer of power and the will of the people should be expressed. And if somebody legitimately gets the most votes or the spread of votes across the regions and so on, then I, for one, fully accept that they should form government or take the office of president or whatever the election's about. I fully accept that. Now, it means, though, that when I accept that, it means that I don't have that from time to time people whose policies I don't agree with, who I think are bad for the country and my fellow citizens and so on, that they're going to win the election sometimes. I don't like that, and I'd rather they didn't, but I do accept it. I do fully accept it as being part of the social contract, that sometimes people you don't like and disapprove of, bad policies or whatever the reason you disapprove, and sometimes they will win the elections, but I accept that. Okay, that's part and parcel of. It's the same as getting a ruling and a judge in a fully independent, fully impartial court of law on interpretation of law by a judge and or a jury. Now, I accept that sometimes verdicts will occur that I don't like or don't approve of, but I must accept that mechanism because it's far better than any alternative. And this is my sort of feeling on the 2020 election. Now, if I was the election commissioner, which I'm never likely to be, incidentally, if I was, my first concern would be the legitimacy of the process. It must appear legitimate, and people must have unswerving confidence in the process and how it's conducted and managed and administered and so on. Now, that means they have to accept outcomes they don't like, but they must be confident in that process, that it was utterly impartial and that the will of the people was only the will of the people was expressed, not the will of some fucking globalist goons, somewhere, but the will of the people. Now, I also accept that there are some people I look at that they don't know, Monday from Tuesday, yet they still have the right to vote, or they're hopelessly radicalized through the education system, but they still have the right to vote. There are things that I sort of worry about there, and some I don't like that. And there are questions about should people be denied the vote because they're so stupid or this or that. Or so. The elites view it that people that haven't got a degree in gender studies shouldn't be allowed to vote. There are various views around that. Nonetheless, the will of the people, in my view, must be expressed, and again, everyone must have confidence in it. They may not like the people who are voting or the views that they have, and that's another consideration. But they must believe the process was uncorrupted. Now, there are many, surprising number, who, and they've told me this directly, that in order to prevent Trump from winning another presidency, that any level of corruption, any fake vote count, anything at all was justified in stopping it because you're stopping Hitler. So therefore it's justified. But what about the will of the people? Well, no, because the will of the people who vote for him, they were Nazis too. So their vote doesn't count. So there's very twisted and perverted sort of, well, it wasn't really corrupt voting and miscounting or this or that. It wasn't really that, because even if it was, we were stopping Hitler, therefore that's acceptable. Now, I don't know how many people it seems like quite a few, I don't know how many people thought that, but they believe that it's okay to rig an election to produce an outcome that they want. Now, this is very much the third party, the third world politicians type position, and goons in the third world. Well, if you can't win legitimately, just rig it. I mean, why would you allow other people to have power when you can? If you can't win the vote of the people, then simply count the votes as you want, so you get the outcome you want. It doesn't matter how you do it; it's the outcome that is the only thing that matters. And if you've got to invent votes, you've got to suppress votes, you've got to do this or that, do it. And whatever you do is legitimate because you have the power. If you have the power, the exercising of it is thus legitimate. Not by independent assessment, but just because you've used it to keep power, or prevent others from getting it. Now, my concern with the 2020 election was that a very senior, very elderly gentleman who could barely string a sentence together, could barely string a sentence together, somehow managed to get the most votes ever in a presidential election, ever. No, not by a few thousand or 1 or 2 million, but something along the lines of, I haven't got the numbers in front of me, I think it was 12 million. So Obama had been, rock star with massive college kid turnout. Rock star Obama had got, I think it was 69 million, I think it was 68, 69 million votes in his first election. That was the all-time record, by quite a decent margin, by the way. An all-time record for the most vote, massive voter turnout for college kids. Joe Biden beat Obama by 12 million votes. Not 1 or 2 million, 12 million votes more than rockstar Obama. Now, this is for a guy who couldn't put a sentence together, who didn't even bother campaigning, somehow got the most votes by far in the history of presidential elections. So that's sort of number one. Now, had Biden been a vigorous campaigner, had he been, making rousing speeches, had he been, campaigning length and breadth of the United States and busting his ass, going from one city to another, with massive turnouts, maybe you could go, oh, okay, well, gee, 81 million seems pretty good, but the guy he ceaselessly campaigned. I mean, what an effective speaker. I mean, wow, he was really out there. What great policies. I mean, the guy never stopped. And the crowds, he got gazillion level crowds wherever he went. If you had that, then you go, okay, well, maybe it's possible. You'd be dubious because Obama had this strongly abetted by the media and the globalist commentariat. It was conferred this rock star status. He was actually a pretty good speaker, I thought, on the circuit. I thought he's pretty good. I mean, he's full of shit, but he was pretty good. He had a great voice, and he was heavily trained in teleprompter reading and speech delivery. I mean, he was very good at it, and he was trained intensively, you can tell, and was obviously a good student at media presentation training, unlike Biden, who was hopeless. But anyway, so that the first flag gives that 81 million votes for someone that didn't campaign and couldn't string a sentence together. And the difference between the rock star Obama and Biden being so wide, if it's a million more votes, you go, oh, okay, well, but really, the chances that Biden would have got more than 60 million votes was very slim indeed. If you look at the spread of presidential elections and the relative. Now, Trump, by contrast, was quite an energetic campaign and pulled large crowds. So it's very rare for a president to increase their vote from one term to another. It happens, I think Nixon and Reagan did rather well, but it's quite rare in the overall scheme of things. Obama, for example, didn't get as many votes the second time round as he got in the first one. So Trump increased his votes by several million. Again, I haven't got the numbers in front of me, but it was handily several million votes more than he got in the first election. And that's quite rare. So that should have put him over the line, handsomely over the line as the winner, but somehow magically didn't. So these are just if you look at it in broad brushstroke terms, these are areas of concern. Now, if I'm the election commissioner, I want to show people, no, look, this was totally legitimate, and you must believe that the election and the process and so on is legitimate, and we're going to prove it to you. But there was no effort, no effort at all to prove it. They just, anyone that questioned it was called a Nazi and a fascist. They do that, but so they were suppressing any questions, but they didn't, I'm not aware of any effort to prove the legitimacy of that election. Just calling everyone a Nazi and then not allowing people to talk about it online was the only thing they did. So now coming to other things where the postal votes, because of the COVID drama at the time, the postal votes so heavily favoured one candidate over another. They couldn't have been legitimate. Well, no, let me rephrase that. It's very hard to believe such a one-sided count of a particular group of votes should be so one-sided. That to me is something that should be investigated quite thoroughly, but it wasn't. Now, another thing was signature matching. The time it took to do signature matching on supposedly hundreds of thousands of ballots. Now, if you count the time done with the amount of people doing the signature matching, then there's less than a quarter of 1 second to do signature matching on these postal ballots. So clearly it wasn't done. And when you look at, well, the signature matching wasn't done, so procedure wasn't followed. And then you have a situation where 90% of that group of votes were for one candidate, or even higher in some cases. Now, in no other place in the United States were you getting 98% to 2%. You just didn't get it. So they were clearly areas that should be examined. Now, there are others in the tight swing states where there were supposedly 10,000 voters registered at one address, all of whom voted for Biden. I mean, that's, again, clearly something you check. So these are things. So I want it all. Now, I'm prepared to accept legitimacy of the winner. I'm not sort of one way or another. But when you look at whether it be in the wider architecture of that election or in the details, which includes mysterious trucks arriving in the middle of the night when everyone's gone home, and only Democrat operatives are there, bringing in bags of ballots that were never audited, excuse me, and where there's no chain of custody, where somebody's got 10,000 votes and that was signed for, that was moved to here, those sort of things. So that was another area. Whereas the election drop boxes that were used, that were funded by Mr. Zuckerberg of Facebook, and where that had an incredibly one-sided outcome for just one candidate. So these are all things that should have been examined carefully. Vote harvesting and so on, again, heavily in favour of only one candidate. These are all things that should have been looked at. So it's hard for me to believe that Biden could have got more than 60, 61 million, 63 million, somewhere around there, votes. He was an unimpressive, uninspiring candidate who was incapable of campaigning. That he made it through that presidential debate shocked me. And they must have. I don't know what they injected him with, but I was staggered that he wasn't impressive, but I was staggered that he lasted as he did. Again, the softball questioning and that sort of thing was very much in support of him, but nonetheless. So when you look at this wider thing, to me, whether it was all legitimate or not, there was no effort to establish the legitimacy of that election, and that to me was as concerning as any other factor. It was also concerning how quick the social media firms were to shut down any questions about it. That was very suspicious, and also that the brutal treatment of those that question it, being deplatformed and that sort of thing. So to me, the issue was, well, maybe it wasn't legitimate. I'm prepared to accept the outcome there, but do a proper and thorough investigation. Do a proper and thorough audit. Prove to the people that it was a legitimate election, and then let's go from there. If it wasn't, then the consequences would be catastrophic. Then all confidence would be lost in the election process. So it's I think as a balance of calculation on damage calculation, that they decide we can't do an investigation, because the only outcome here is going to be that either it was willful or willfully done, or it was negligent or incompetence, but that the election was was mismanaged or corrupted to a massive degree. And that's concerning for everybody. And it's in my view, it's part of the loss and degradation of what used to be the social contract in the Western world, the legitimacy of authority. And the authorities now are losing all legitimacy if they haven't already lost it. And to me, that's a great tragedy. Being with Tacitus today, your Pushback channel, and thank you for listening.